My name is Marissa Holden. After 15 years of loyalty, I was blindsided, stripped of everything I built, betrayed by the very boss I once trusted. The humiliation burned deep, but beneath the pain, something stronger rose, the need to fight back. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I chose to expose the lies, reclaim my worth, and walk away, not broken, but free. If you've ever been overlooked, silenced, or made to feel small, I invite you to listen to my full story. When you're done, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did I do the right thing standing up for myself? Or should I have chosen a quieter road? Let me know. That morning started like any ordinary Monday until it wasn't. The rain had been falling in a steady, thin mist over Raleigh since just before dawn. I sat in my car, parked under the gray skeleton of the Sterling Rowe building, fingers wrapped too tightly around the steering wheel. The dashboard clock blinked 8:12 a.m. I could feel a knot of something thick and uneasy, sitting in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. Just another Monday. Just another meeting. I opened the door, stepped into the mist, and walked toward the glass doors like I had 1,000 times before. Inside, the air felt different. It wasn't the cold blast of AC or the faint smell of burnt coffee from the break room. It was something else, something heavier. People were at their desks, typing, shuffling papers, pretending to be absorbed in work. But the usual greetings were missing. A few nodded curtly when I passed. Others looked right past me, as if I wasn't even there. I forced a smile toward Jenna at reception, but she ducked her head down into her monitor, like she hadn't seen me. The hallways seemed wider, emptier. Whispers floated at the edges of my hearing, and every step I took seemed to echo too loudly against the polished tile floors. Just as I dropped my bag at my cubicle, the email notification chimed on my screen. Subject: Meeting request, 9 a.m. From Vera Langston. No details. No agenda. Just a time, a room number, and my name. Alone. I stared at it for a moment, feeling my stomach twist tighter. Meetings with Vera weren't unusual, but something about this felt off. No CCs. No project names. Just me and her. I clicked the email closed without replying, pretending it didn't feel like a summons. But I already knew better. Sitting there, trying to look busy, my mind wandered back to 15 years ago, the first day I had walked into Sterling Rowe. Back when the lobby smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Back when Vera had personally welcomed me, shaking my hand firmly, looking me straight in the eye and saying, "Stick with me. There's no limit to what you can accomplish here." I had believed her. God, I had believed her. Over the years, I had stayed late when no one else would. Taken on projects no one wanted. Smiled through weekends full of last-minute deadlines and cancel vacations. I didn't mind. It felt like building something real. Like investing in something that would someday invest back in me. And Vera, she had always been there, nodding approvingly, dropping casual compliments that made every sacrifice seem worthwhile. But lately things had shifted. It started small. A project reassigned here, a meeting canceled there. Then entire initiatives I had spearheaded were handed off to newer, louder voices. The invitations to leadership meetings stopped appearing in my inbox. When I asked, Vera smiled thinly and said, "We're streamlining for efficiency. Don't take it personally." I tried not to. God knows I tried. But the whispers down the hall grew louder. Newer faces looked at me with polite disinterest, like I was part of the old furniture they were just waiting to replace. I told myself it was just office politics. That if I kept my head down, kept working hard, it would pass. Until that morning. They held a quarterly recognition meeting in the large conference room. Balloons, banners, the whole show. I sat in the back, out of habit. I wasn't expecting anything. I never did. But when Kendall Moore, one of the newer hires, was called to the front to accept the Innovation Leadership Award for a project that had been my idea, my blood, my weekends, something inside me shifted. Vera was the first to stand and applaud, her smile wide and polished under the fluorescent lights. Kendall accepted the plaque with a practiced modesty, flashing a grin that caught the attention of the regional director sitting in the front row. I stayed seated. My hands locked into fists on my lap. My heart thudded heavily, each beat a slow, sinking reminder that whatever trust one had placed here, it had been misplaced. I thought about all the overtime hours, all the missed dinners with family, all the times I had told myself loyalty meant something. I stared at Vera, standing there, cheering for someone else, someone newer, shinier, easier to mold. And for the first time, I didn't feel pride or sorrow. I felt hollow, completely hollow. When the applause died down and the cake was cut, I sat there, frozen, staring at the crumbs on the tablecloth, at the empty plate Vera left behind when she walked away without a glance. That was when I knew something bad was coming, and they thought I was blind to it. But what they didn't know, what Vera didn't know, was that I had been preparing for this day longer than they could imagine. By the time Friday afternoon rolled around, the waiting had ground me down into something small and restless. After the recognition meeting earlier that week, I had expected Vera to call me in, to address the elephant standing right there in the middle of the office floor. Instead, she sent a single-line email. "We'll talk more at the end of the week." No explanation. No apology. Just a hollow promise dangling like bait. When I passed her office door in the hallway, I caught a glimpse of her silhouette through the frosted glass, standing tall, laughing with Kendall Moore, as if my years of work had never existed. I kept walking, my footsteps oddly loud on the carpet. That weekend, I couldn't stay home. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in, heavy with doubts that buzzed louder than the hum of the TV. I kept turning things over in my mind. Had I made a mistake? Had I missed something? Maybe I hadn't been as indispensable as I thought. Maybe loyalty meant nothing if you weren't loud enough to demand to be seen. Oak Ivy Cafe had always been my retreat, a little brick building on a quiet corner with battered leather chairs and windows that fogged up in the rain. I found my usual spot by the window, nursing a lukewarm coffee I barely tasted, pretending to work on a presentation that no one was going to care about anymore. That's when he sat down at the next table. A man in his mid-40s, maybe early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a worn leather jacket that had seen better days. He was flipping through a yellowed paperback, tapping his foot absently against the chair leg. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the cafe was quiet, and when the barista brought him his refill, she said, "Good to see you back, Elijah." He thanked her with a warm smile, then caught me glancing over. He gave a small nod, not intrusive, just polite, the way strangers sometimes do when they recognize another regular. A few minutes later, we found ourselves chatting about the rain, about the mediocre coffee, about how the whole city felt gray that weekend. It was easy conversation, surprisingly easy for two people who hadn't exchanged names yet. Eventually, he asked me where I worked. "Sterling Rowe," I said, forcing the words out like they tasted bitter. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "No kidding. I used to work there. Long time ago." Something in his tone made me set my coffee down. "You did?" "Yeah," he said, chuckling dryly. "Spent a decade there, actually. Thought I'd retire with them. Thought loyalty meant something." He shook his head, the smile fading. Turns out they had other plans. I leaned in, heart suddenly beating faster. "What happened?" He shrugged like it didn't matter anymore, but his fingers tapped a restless rhythm against the edge of the table. "New leadership. New direction. Same old story. I didn't fit the mold they were building, so they shoved me out. Vera Langston made sure it happened fast, said it was for the good of the company." The name hit me like a slap. He saw the flicker cross my face and leaned closer. "You know her," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, swallowing hard. "She's still there." "Of course she is," Elijah said, voice low. "People like her always survive the messes they create. They're good at it. They know how to smile while they stab you in the back." I sat back, feeling the weight of his words settle into my bones. It was as if he had peeled back a layer of denial I didn't even realize I was still clinging to. I thought about Vera's cold smile, about the way Kendall Moore had stood under the spotlight that should have been mine. "They don't care about loyalty," Elijah continued. "They care about who's useful to them in the moment. And when you're not useful anymore, you're expendable." I wanted to argue. I wanted to find some flaw in his story that made it different from mine. But deep down, I knew there wasn't one. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain pattered against the windows, steady and indifferent. Then Elijah set his cup down, looked me straight in the eye, and said quietly, "You can stay and drown in loyalty to people who don't give a damn, or you can stand up and fight for yourself. But you can't do both." The words hung between us, heavier than the gray sky outside. And I realized I had a choice. Monday morning came heavy with gray skies and the kind of humidity that made everything feel sticky. I walked into Sterling Rowe holding my coffee like it was armor, bracing myself for whatever Vera had planned. And she didn't waste time. Before I'd even settled at my desk, an email pinged. Subject: Project Management Reassignment. I opened it with a sinking feeling. Inside was a short, clinical message from Vera announcing that Kendall Moore would now be overseeing the projects I had been managing, the ones I had spent months building from scratch. It was dressed up in corporate speak: cross-functional collaboration, leadership development, strategic oversight. But it didn't take a genius to read between the lines. They were cutting me off at the knees. When Kendall strutted into my cubicle 20 minutes later, clipboard in hand, grinning like she'd just won a prize, the knot in my stomach hardened. "Hey," she said, overly cheerful. "Looks like I'll be helping steer the ship on these campaigns now. Vera thinks it'll be good to get some fresh eyes on things." Helping steer the ship. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from saying something I'd regret. Instead, I nodded, forcing a smile so brittle it felt like my face might crack. Over the next few days, Kendall took steering to mean bulldozing. She rewrote strategy documents without consulting me, scrapped carefully laid timelines, made promises to clients she had no authority to make. When I tried to offer input, politely, calmly, professionally, she brushed it off with a laugh. "We're moving fast, Marissa," she said one afternoon, tapping her temple like I was just too slow to keep up. "You gotta adapt." Adapt. I had spent 15 years adapting, bending, compromising. And now, here I was, watching someone who barely knew the difference between a campaign timeline and a coffee order rewrite months of work in a matter of hours. Still, I kept my head down. I told myself it was temporary. Maybe Vera would see the mess Kendall was making. Maybe it would all blow over. I clung to that hope until Friday morning. They gathered us all in the executive conference room, the one with the wall of windows overlooking the city, the one where I had once presented my first major project, hands shaking but proud. Now I sat in the back, invisible. Vera stood at the front, her posture crisp and commanding. Beside her, beaming like a contestant on a game show, was Kendall. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vera said, her voice smooth as silk, "I want to take a moment to recognize some outstanding innovation and leadership on one of our most critical campaigns this quarter." I felt my pulse quicken. A flicker of stubborn hope tried to spark inside me. Maybe she'd acknowledge. "Kendall Moore has taken the lead on revitalizing our client strategy with amazing results," Vera continued, gesturing grandly toward her. The room broke into polite applause. I sat frozen, the blood draining from my face. Revitalizing. Innovating. Those weren't her ideas. They were mine, every line of that strategy, every adjustment based on months of late nights and client calls and redrafts. Vera clapped first, smiling with the easy grace of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. When Kendall took the microphone to say a few chirpy words about teamwork and vision, Vera turned slightly, her eyes scanning the room, passing right over me like I wasn't even there. Not one person spoke up. Not one familiar face met my eyes. I looked around at the colleagues I had celebrated birthdays with, mourned layoffs with, pulled all-nighters with. Heads down, eyes averted, silent. The applause swelled again, and something inside me, something tender and foolish, cracked. I squeezed my hands into fists beneath the table, nails biting into my palms, anchoring myself against the sudden rush of heat behind my eyes. I wasn't angry yet. Not fully. Not the way I would be later. Right then, all I felt was a hollow kind of disbelief. Like realizing a house you thought was home was just a facade, propped up with cardboard and duct tape. When the meeting ended and everyone filed out, eager to grab coffee and shake off the tension, I stayed seated. Alone. I pulled off my company badge and laid it on the table, tracing the embossed letters of Sterling and Rowe with my thumb. Was this ever really home? Or had I been clinging to an illusion all along? The answer sat heavy in the silence. It started with the spreadsheets. After the awards meeting, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the hollow claps and Kendall's bright, undeserved smile. So when Monday came, I buried myself in work, hoping the familiar rhythm would dull the sharp edges inside me. But the more I looked, the more things didn't add up. Expense reports were padded with vague charges. Bonuses were awarded to names I didn't recognize, people who had barely been at the company long enough to set up their voicemail. Vendor contracts were altered without proper signatures. It wasn't glaring, not the kind of fraud you see in crime shows, but it was there, stitched between the lines, waiting for someone stubborn enough to notice. For days, I hovered on the edge of denial. Maybe it was an accounting error. Maybe it wasn't my business. But the pit in my stomach said otherwise. Sterling and Rowe wasn't just replacing me. They were rotting from the inside out. By Thursday, I found myself back at Oak and Ivy Cafe, nursing another coffee and watching the rain smear the world outside into blurry streaks. I didn't plan to run into Elijah again, but maybe part of me had hoped for it. He spotted me before I spotted him. He slid into the seat across from me without asking, setting his cup down with a deliberate thud. "You look like hell," he said, not unkindly. "Thanks," I muttered, forcing a smile. "I feel worse." He nodded, as if he already knew. We sat in silence for a minute, the sounds of the cafe, the low hum of conversation, the clink of cups, wrapping around us like a blanket. Finally, I said it. "I think there's more going on than just office politics." Elijah leaned forward. "You don't say." "I found things," I whispered, like the walls might hear. "In the financials. In the contracts. It's not just me they're screwing over." He studied me for a long moment. Then he said low and firm, "If you walk away now, they win. They get to keep doing it. To someone else. To everyone else." I stared down at my hands, feeling the old, familiar instinct to minimize, to excuse, to swallow it all just to avoid making waves. "If you want to leave," Elijah said, "fine. But don't leave empty-handed. If you're going down, make sure you take the truth with you." It wasn't just advice. It was a challenge. I didn't answer him then. I didn't have to. That night, back in my apartment, I started gathering everything. Quietly. Carefully. I forwarded emails to a personal, secure account. I printed off invoices, scrubbed metadata from files, kept everything hidden on an old flash drive buried at the bottom of my purse. And when I whispered to a few trusted coworkers, people who had been sidelined, silenced, stepped on just like me, they didn't hesitate. They sent me what they had: suspicious contracts, whistleblower complaints that had been buried, screenshots of HR correspondence that looked more like threats than policies. Piece by piece, the picture came together. Sterling and Rowe wasn't just mistreating its employees. It was cheating them, lying to clients, cooking its books to pad executive bonuses while cutting staff hours and benefits. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was corruption. Some nights, staring at the growing pile of evidence, I felt a sick kind of power humming under my skin. I could bring them down. I could blow it all open. But then doubt would creep in. What if they turned it back on me? What if they sued me? Blacklisted me? What if no one believed me? What if I ended up alone? Broke, unemployable? The fear gnawed at me, persistent as a loose tooth you can't stop tonguing. Part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't seen anything, delete the files, wipe my hands clean, walk away quietly, and start over somewhere else, anywhere else. But another part, the part that had sat in that conference room, fists clenched, heartbreaking, knew I couldn't. Not if I wanted to look at myself in the mirror ever again. Sterling and Rowe had counted on my silence. On everyone's silence. That's how people like Vera Langston stayed powerful. They built their empires on the backs of people too scared to speak. I wasn't going to be one of them. So I sat down at my kitchen table, heart hammering so hard it made my hands shake, and drafted a new email. Subject: Attention. Barton, Blake LLP, Sterling and Rowe Communications compliance violations. I attached every file, every document, every shred of truth I had. I stared at the send button for a long time. Then I clicked it. No more pretending. No more waiting. One way or another, the reckoning had begun. The next few days at Sterling and Rowe felt like walking across a frozen lake, every step a gamble. The office buzzed with a nervous energy, conversations cut short when I entered a room, eyes flickering away as if I carried some contagious disease. No one said anything outright, but the air was thick with it, a tension sharp enough to taste. Vera's door stayed closed most of the time. When it opened, it was to usher in people like Kendall, laughing a little too loudly, staying a little too long. Every glance, every stifled whisper said the same thing. Something was coming. And for once, it wasn't me who was in the dark. On Thursday morning, right after I had sat down with a cup of weak breakroom coffee, my phone buzzed. Meeting request, Vera Langston. Immediate. No subject line. No agenda. Just an instruction. I sat there for a minute, staring at the screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. Part of me wanted to run. Another part, the part that had sent that email to Barton Blake LLP, was done being afraid. Vera's office was as pristine as ever, the heavy oak desk polished to a mirror shine, the walls lined with awards and photographs carefully curated to tell a story of success. She stood by the window when I entered, hands clasped behind her back, looking out over the city like a queen surveying her kingdom. "Marissa," she said, turning with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Come in. Close the door." I did. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, and I sat, perching on the edge like I might need to spring up at any second. For a moment, Vera just studied me, her head tilted slightly, a small, knowing smile playing at her lips. Then she sat down, folding her hands neatly on the desk. "I wanted to have a candid conversation," she said, voice syrupy sweet. "About your future here." I didn't say anything. I didn't trust myself to. Vera leaned in slightly. "I know there's been some tension lately. Understandable. Transitions are hard, especially for those who've been here a long time." She paused, giving me a chance to nod or agree. I stayed still. Her smile tightened. "I think it would be best for everyone if you considered other opportunities. A graceful exit, Marissa, before things get messy." I felt the blood drain from my face, but I kept my expression neutral. "You've built a strong reputation here," Vera continued. "It would be a shame to tarnish that. Digging up old grievances, questioning decisions, that's not the legacy you want, is it?" I understood exactly what she was saying. Leave quietly, and maybe they'd let me keep my dignity. Fight, and they would smear me into the carpet. She tapped a manicured nail lightly against the surface of the desk, the only sound in the room. "Sometimes," she said, her voice dropping, "it's better to walk away before history gets rewritten in ways you might not like. No one wants the past to get messy." For a flicker of a moment, I saw something else in her eyes. Not just calculation, but fear. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be dangerous. Enough to be scared. The thought almost made me smile. Instead, I let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate, until even Vera shifted slightly in her seat. Inside, I was shaking from anger, from fear, from the sick rush of adrenaline, but I didn't let it show. "Not anymore." "You're right," I said finally, my voice low and steady. "History has a funny way of coming back around." Her smile faltered. I leaned forward just enough to meet her eyes fully, the way she had always done to intimidate me. Only now, it was her turn to flinch. "I think," I said quietly, "you should start preparing for what's coming next." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Vera sat back, crossing her arms, her face smoothing into that mask of polite disinterest she wore so well. "Suit yourself," she said, voice clipped. But the crack in her armor was there. I saw it. And I walked out of her office with my head high, leaving the door swinging slowly shut behind me. The war had officially begun. That night, I didn't really sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, feeling every heartbeat like a drum against my ribs. The house was quiet except for the occasional groan of the old pipes, and my mind was anything but. Memories flooded in, late nights finishing reports, weekends sacrificed for last-minute deadlines, birthdays spent answering emails instead of blowing out candles. Years and years of swallowing frustration, smiling through slights, convincing myself that loyalty would eventually be rewarded. I wondered if every fool in history thought the same thing. Sometime after midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Elijah. "You still awake?" he asked, voice low and steady. "Yeah," I whispered into the dark. "You're doing the right thing, Marissa. Don't let them convince you otherwise. They survive on people's silence. They count on it. Don't give it to them." For a moment, I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about refusing to be complicit in something that had stolen too much from too many. "Thanks," I said. My voice cracked a little, but I didn't care. "You're stronger than you think," Elijah added. "Finish this." When the call ended, I sat up in bed, swung my feet onto the floor, and turned on the lamp. My laptop's screen glowed cold and blue in the dark. I pulled up the files I had painstakingly gathered, emails, contracts, invoices, screenshots, everything. It was all there, a digital mountain of betrayal. My fingers hovered over the mouse for a long time. Once I sent it, there would be no walking it back. No pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen. No shrinking back into invisibility. I attached the files to a new email. To Barton Blake LLP. Subject: Sterling and Rowe Communications compliance violations. I added a second email, addressed to the North Carolina Department of Labor, attaching copies for good measure. My heart raced, so hard it hurt. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the laptop shut and pretend this was still someone else's problem. But it wasn't. It was mine. And I was done being scared. I hit send. The little spinning icon flashed on the screen, and then the messages disappeared into the ether. Gone. Delivered. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling again, only now it felt a little higher, a little less heavy. The hours that followed crawled by. I made tea I didn't drink. I tried to watch TV, but the noise grated on my nerves. I checked my email obsessively, half expecting to see a furious message from Vera, half expecting the sky to fall. Instead, the world outside stayed stubbornly normal. Rain pattered against the windows. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then went silent. I realized, sitting there in the soft glow of the kitchen light, that whatever happened next, I had crossed a line. There was no more waiting for someone else to fix things. No more hoping for fairness to arrive gift-wrapped at my desk. I had made my choice. Around 4 a.m, just as the first light began to bleed into the sky, my phone buzzed again. New email. Barton Blake LLP. Subject: Receipt confirmation. The body was short and formal. "We have received your materials. Our compliance team is reviewing the documents and will be initiating the next steps promptly. Thank you for coming forward." I sat there, reading it over and over, until the words blurred. Then, finally, a strange laugh bubbled out of me, half relief, half exhaustion. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't brush them away. For the first time in years, they weren't tears of frustration or betrayal. They were tears of release. I wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy from here. I knew there would be fallout, retaliation, smear campaigns, maybe even lawsuits. But it didn't matter. The truth was out. And whatever came next, I would face it standing up, not crawling. The email landed in my inbox early Monday morning. Mandatory meeting. Executive conference room. 9 a.m. sharp. No explanation. No agenda. Just a summons. By the time I reached the elevator, the building was already humming with a different kind of energy. Tight, nervous, crackling just beneath the surface. People gathered in small clusters, whispering behind cups of coffee, glancing toward the executive floor like it was a gallows being built overnight. Inside the conference room, The usual pretense of camaraderie was gone. No casual jokes. No warm greetings. Just a table full of stiff shoulders and darting eyes. Vera sat at the head, perfectly composed, flipping through a manila folder as if this was any other Monday. I slid into a chair at the far end and watched. Vera cleared her throat, the sound sharp enough to cut the tension. "As many of you are aware," she began, voice crisp and polished, "recent rumors have circulated regarding our internal operations. Let me be clear, Sterling and Rowe holds itself to the highest standards. Any insinuation otherwise is baseless and harmful." Her eyes swept the room like searchlights, daring anyone to challenge her. "There will always be individuals," she continued, tapping a manicured nail against the folder, "who, when faced with change, choose resentment over resilience. Some people, sadly, do not fit with the evolving culture of excellence we are building." The word stung, even though I knew they were meant to. I watched as she framed herself as the savior of a company under siege by malcontents. Watched as she twisted the truth into something almost believable. Almost. And I realized then if I stayed silent she would win. Again. So I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, making every head turn. Even Vera blinked, just once, before masking it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my fists or throw accusations like grenades. I spoke quietly, steadily, letting the truth do the heavy lifting. "For 15 years, I said, I gave everything to this company. I worked weekends, canceled vacations, mentored teams, took on projects no one else would touch. The room was so still you could hear the faint hum of the AC. I did it because I believed in what Sterling and Rowe stood for, or what I thought it stood for." I looked straight at Vera. But somewhere along the way, that changed. Loyalty stopped being a value. It became a weakness to exploit. Hard work stopped being rewarded and started being siphoned off and sold under someone else's name. I could see the color draining from Vera's face now, slow and inevitable as a tide pulling out to sea. I watched as leadership turned a blind eye to overtime abuses, to financial misconduct, to deliberate retaliation against those who dared ask questions. I stayed silent longer than I should have. I own that. A few people shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. But I won't stay silent anymore. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, heavy with everything they had tried so hard to bury, and placed it neatly on the conference table in front of Vera. "My resignation," I said, my voice clear. Effective immediately. Vera didn't reach for the envelope. She just sat there, staring, her hands clenched too tightly in her lap. I turned to the room, to the coworkers who had watched me be erased piece by piece, and said, "I will not work for people who don't respect human dignity. I hope the rest of you find your voices before it's too late." No one spoke. No one needed to. The silence itself was an earthquake. Without waiting for permission, without looking back, I walked out, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind me. The sunlight hit my face as I pushed through the heavy glass doors of Sterling and Rowe for the last time. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Whatever I had built there, whatever loyalty, whatever history, it stayed trapped inside those walls, weighed down by the choices they had made. I walked out into the crisp afternoon air feeling lighter than I had in years. There were no tears. No second-guessing. Just a quiet certainty that I had finally done the right thing. It didn't take long for the fallout to make the news. About 3 weeks later, local media picked up the story. Sterling and Rowe Communications under investigation for financial misconduct, labor violations, and multiple employee grievances. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee in hand, watching the news anchor report that Vera Langston had been suspended pending further review, her smug headshot flashing briefly on the screen before cutting to footage of the company's downtown office, now surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras. Part of me expected to feel vindicated, maybe even triumphant. Instead, I just felt done. Done carrying the weight of their lies. Done pretending that place had ever been anything more than what it had become. In the weeks that followed, emails and phone calls trickled in. Former colleagues reached out quietly, offering words of support, admiration they hadn't dared voice before. Recruiters sent offers from companies I'd never even heard of, suddenly interested in someone they had overlooked for years. But I wasn't chasing titles anymore. I wasn't interested in shiny offices or empty promises. When the offer from Everline Media came through, smaller company, smaller paycheck, but real leadership, real values, I didn't hesitate long. I accepted without needing to sleep on it. My first day at Everline felt strange in the best way. People smiled without agenda. Meetings started on time and ended with handshakes, not backroom whispers. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't waiting for the floor to fall out from under me. One rainy afternoon not long after I started, I found myself back at Oak and Ivy Cafe. It was almost muscle memory by now. The creaky floors, the uneven tables, the comforting hum of conversation, and clinking mugs. I was stirring a second cup of coffee when Elijah walked in, spotted me, and smiled that slow, knowing smile of his. Without a word, he slid into the seat across from me. "Looks like you made it out alive," he said, raising an eyebrow. "More than alive," I said. "Free." He laughed, a low, genuine sound, and shook his head. "Told you. You were never as stuck as you thought." We sat there a while, talking about nothing and everything. About new beginnings. About old scars. About how some battles leave you better, not bitter. And I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't bracing for impact. I was just here. Different. Stronger. The woman who had once clung so desperately to the illusion of safety, to the idea that loyalty would protect her, she was gone. In her place was someone who understood that peace doesn't come from staying quiet. It comes from standing up, from letting go, from choosing yourself even when it terrifies you. When we finally stood to leave, the rain had slowed to a soft mist. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and stepped out into the street, the world washed clean and humming with possibility. I didn't have a roadmap. I didn't need one. For the first time, I trusted myself to find the way forward. I walked into the fading light, smiling, not because I had won some war, but because I had decided I was worth fighting for. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means losing things you thought you couldn't live without. But maybe that's the only way to find out what you were meant to carry forward. If you've ever been in a place where staying felt safer than leaving, I hope my story reminds you that peace isn't given, it's claimed. Have you ever had a moment where you realized you deserved better, too? If this story touched something inside you, I'd love for you to stay connected. There are more journeys, more quiet battles, and more victories to share, and maybe, just maybe, you'll see a part of yourself in them, too.